Hey guys, tonight we slip into something a little unusual: fur, smoke, and the steady heartbeat of a Viking longhouse. Imagine yourself ducking through a heavy wooden doorway, snow crusted on your shoulders, the kind that stings your cheeks and makes your breath billow like dragon steam. The air inside hits you with heat from a central fire, smoke curling lazily under a roof of timbers. It's close, it's crowded, and yet there's a rhythm here. People know how to settle into sleep, as if the whole house has practiced this nightly ritual for centuries. You, on the other hand, probably won't survive this without sneezing yourself awake or rolling into the fire pit. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The longhouse swallows you whole. You're pressed between men, women, children, even the odd goat tucked into a corner for warmth. Forget personal space. This is survival sleep, where the outside world can be fatal if you let cold seep into your bones. That's the first Forgotten Viking hack: cold winds, warm furs. These people lived in a world where drafts weren't inconveniences, they were killers. A shiver could spiral into frostbite faster than you can say Nordic noir. So bedding wasn't a matter of plush mattresses or foam density. It was about layers: pelts from reindeer, seals, bears, anything with fur thick enough to trap body heat. You stretch out on one of these platforms, a wooden frame piled with straw, topped with furs that smell faintly of smoke and wet dog. Romantic, right? But once you're down, wrapped like a burrito in fur layers, the chill that nipped at your nose fades into a cocoon of warmth. Vikings didn't chase the perfect room temperature like we do with thermostats. They embraced contrast: icy air around, hot bodies under hides. The result? Their sleep ran deep, restorative, like hibernating bears who'd cracked the code of surviving endless winters. Mainstream historians often point out that Scandinavia's harsh climate forced people to innovate in every aspect of life, from shipbuilding to clothing. But one underrated innovation was simply learning how to sleep properly in brutal cold. Modern science backs this up. Cooler sleeping environments actually help regulate melatonin, the hormone that governs your sleep cycle. So, ironically, those drafty longhouses may have given Vikings a biological boost, helping them fall into longer, more stable rest. Meanwhile, you're over here fiddling with your smart thermostat, trying to decide if 67 degrees F feels too arctic or too sweaty. And here's the kicker: you weren't sleeping alone. Body heat was a communal currency. Pile enough humans together, toss in some livestock for bonus warmth, and suddenly you've built a furnace without electricity. You might wrinkle your modern nose at the lack of privacy, but you'd be surprised at how quickly comfort outweighs awkwardness when the choice is intimacy or hypothermia. Anthropologists have found that many ancient cultures relied on shared body heat as a survival mechanism, but the Vikings turned it into a nightly practice. Now here's the quirky tidbit for tonight. Some sagas mention the practice of lining sleeping areas with birch bark before layering straw and furs on top. Why? Birch naturally resists rot and pests. Imagine your mattress being part anti-flea technology, part woodland aromatherapy diffuser. You might wake up smelling faintly of a Scandinavian forest, which beats the chemical tang of your memory foam mattress, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether Vikings deliberately engineered this birch bark hack for hygiene and sleep comfort, or if it was just a convenient material they had lying around. Either way, it meant fewer critters crawling into bed with you. And if you've ever woken up scratching thanks to summer mosquitoes, you'll appreciate the genius of a birch bark barrier. You lie back now, bundled in reindeer pelts, the sound of winter wind clawing at the longhouse walls. Every creak of timber and snap of fire reminds you just how thin the line was between warmth and exposure. But inside your cocoon, there's a sense of safety. And that's the Forgotten Viking hack staring you in the face. Sleep wasn't about chasing comfort. It was about creating resilience. Every fur layered over you is a shield against a world that doesn't care if you wake up tomorrow. Here's a little modern aside. Think about your own bedroom. You've probably got central heating or air conditioning, blackout curtains, and maybe even a white noise machine. The irony: despite all those comforts, your sleep is often worse than someone living in a drafty longhouse surrounded by goats. Maybe it's because we've engineered out the extremes. Vikings embraced them: icy cold, heavy warmth, sharp contrast. Their bodies responded naturally. Yours? Maybe it's just confused by the glow of your phone at 2 a.m. And speaking of glow, look around. The fire is dying lower. You'll get to that in the next moment, when flickering embers teach your brain how to shut itself down. But for now, here in the longhouse, your first lesson is clear. If you want to sleep like a Viking, start by reclaiming the power of cold and warmth, not fighting against it. Maybe ditch the weighted blanket for something that feels a little more primal. Just, leave the goat outside. The embers glow lower and your eyes can't help but follow them. Each crackle is like a lullaby written in sparks, hypnotic in its simplicity. You don't get this with LED lamps, do you? Modern bulbs scream, stay awake, keep scrolling. But fire is nature's sleep app. As the flames shrink down, the Viking longhouse itself begins to quiet. Children burrow deeper into hides, someone coughs, a dog sighs heavily. The rhythm of the hearth sets the rhythm of the body. Vikings knew this without nomming it. The cycle of fire mirrored the cycle of rest: bright blaze for activity, smoldering embers for winding down. In a world without switches, dimming came naturally. Your brain, lulled by the slow fade of orange light, prepares for sleep the way a tree leans towards sunlight. Historians point out that circadian rhythms were guided almost entirely by sun and fire before modern lighting rewrote the rules. And science today: it tells you that blue light disrupts melatonin, while warm, red-orange tones signal your body to power down. In other words, the Vikings had a built-in dimmer switch centuries before you could say, "Hey Siri, set the lights to sunset mode." You sit closer to the hearth now, rubbing your hands near its warmth. The air smells of charred oak, resin, and something faintly sweet, maybe a pine log tossed in earlier. Fire wasn't just practical, it was a psychological anchor. A dwindling fire reminded people that night was here, that it was time to rest. No to-do list apps, no midnight email pings. Just the glow saying, "Sleep now, tomorrow will need your strength." And here's a quirky tidbit. In some archaeological digs of Viking homes, layers of soot found on rafters suggest fires smoldered slowly through the night rather than blazing constantly. Families would bank the fire, covering embers with ash to keep them alive until morning. Think of it as the Viking equivalent of setting your phone on low power mode. The embers stayed dormant, waiting to flare again at dawn with the smallest puff of breath. You imagine leaning over, stirring up sparks, and feeling like you've conjured life itself from the ashes. Historians still argue whether these fires were maintained solely for warmth, or if there was a ritualistic undertone. Was it just survival, or was fire a living companion, something spiritual, a guardian presence? After all, Norse mythology places fire right at the heart of creation. The world began in the clash between fire and ice, Muspelheim's flames meeting Niflheim's frost. So maybe every hearth in every longhouse carried a cosmic echo, a miniature recreation of the world's birth and balance. When you slept beside that ember glow, you weren't just staying warm, you were reenacting creation itself. The more you stare at the flickering coals, the heavier your eyelids feel. It's not boredom, it's biology. Studies today show that firelight, with its subtle motion and lack of sharp edges, naturally lowers heart rates. Some researchers even argue that humans evolved around fire, that our nervous systems are wired to relax in its presence. In the Viking world, this meant bedtime came not from force but from nature's persuasion. You didn't fight it, you just gave in. Compare that with your bedroom tonight. Screens, overhead lights, maybe even the buzzing street lamp sneaking through your curtains. Instead of fatting into rest, you're resisting it with every push notification. No wonder sleep feels elusive. Here, in the longhouse, fire makes the decision for you. Someone shifts near you, tossing a log onto the coals. Sparks fly, a brief reminder of day before sinking back into night. Your mind drifts to how central fire was. It cooked food, hardened tools, warded off spirits, and set the stage for stories. And what better way to fall asleep than with a story whispered in shadows? You picture a skald, an old storyteller, murmuring sagas about gods and giants as the flames mirrored battles in miniature. Fire and tale together worked like a lullaby, coaxing minds into dreams where the stories continued. Another odd detail. Some sagas describe warriors practicing a ritual of sleeping near their weapons, firelight gleaming off blades laid beside them. Imagine lying down, axe within arm's reach, the glow casting your shadow tall against the wall. Sleep wasn't entirely soft here. It carried edges of vigilance, readiness. And yet the fire soothed, wrapping even warriors in its hush. It's funny, you think, how we pay good money now for sunset lamps and sleep bulbs that mimic this same spectrum of light. All along, the Vikings had the real deal, free with every log they burned. They didn't need studies about melatonin suppression or circadian rhythms. They just lived it, letting fire dictate when to slow, when to surrender. As the embers dim further, shadows stretch across the rafters, shapes that almost look alive. You wonder if children once saw gods or monsters there, their imagination stirred by the half-light. Maybe that was part of the ritual, letting the mind drift in that liminal space between flame and dark, a place where stories and sleep blurred together. Now you ease back into your furs, firelight brushing your face. It's softer, gentler, less insistent than any lamp. Your breathing slows with the room. And here's the Forgotten Viking hack, the one we've almost erased. They didn't fight the night with electricity. They let fire fade, and with it, they let themselves fade too. You think about tomorrow, when the fire will be coaxed back to life with a few breaths and some kindling. But for now, it rests, and so do you. Your world shrinks to a glow, a crackle, a comfort so ancient it feels carved into your bones. You shift on the straw-stuffed platform and suddenly notice there's barely a hand's breadth between you and the next sleeper. Privacy isn't a concept here. The longhouse is a single shared body breathing in rhythm, a low tide of snores, whispers, and occasional coughs. You're squeezed between strangers and kin alike, a dog's paw nudging your ankle, a toddler curled against your side as if you were always part of this family. At first, it feels awkward, maybe even suffocating. But slowly you realize, this closeness is the point. Vikings didn't see the bed as a solo fortress of dreams. It was a communal raft keeping everyone afloat through the long northern night. Archaeologists who have studied reconstructed longhouses note that family sleeping platforms stretch the length of the walls, sometimes raised above ground to avoid drafts. Whole households, grandparents, parents, children, even visitors, piled together in a patchwork quilt of limbs and hides. Your modern mattress with its queen, or king labels seems almost laughably solitary in comparison. And here's the first fact to ground you. Anthropologists point out that shared sleeping wasn't unique to Vikings. For most of human history, communal beds were the norm, not the exception. Separate bedrooms are a recent luxury, born of larger houses, wealth, and let's be honest, our obsession with personal space. The Viking world had no such indulgence. Warmth came from proximity, and survival beat solitude every time. At first, you feel every shift of the group, the weight of a neighbor rolling, the heat of another body pressed close. But gradually, your own body sinks to the shared warmth. There's a comfort in it, a primal reassurance. You're part of a living thermal battery. No need to shiver alone. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some sagas and folklore mention the custom of sleeping crosswise on these long platforms, with bodies alternating head to toe. Why? Well, imagine 10 or 12 people crammed onto one bench. If everyone lay head to head, you get a mess of elbows and faces and endless complaints about snoring. By flipping orientation, feet met faces, but tucked in furs that actually reduce disruption. Plus, there's the unspoken bonus. If lice or fleas hopped, At least they had to navigate a whole new terrain before reaching the next scalp. You grin at the thought. Primitive pest control through geometry. Historians still argue whether this alternating sleep arrangement was standard practice or a quirk of certain households. Some believe sagas exaggerated the details for dramatic storytelling. Others suggest it was common sense, an unwritten code to maximize space and minimize discomfort. Either way, you can almost picture the nightly negotiations. Who sleeps near the wall? Who takes the smoky side near the hearth? Who ends up wedged between two sweaty uncles after a feast? The longhouse hums like a hive. You hear the low thrum of collective breath, the occasional rustle of straw as someone shifts, the muffled bleat of a goat also nestled in for warmth. Modern ears, conditioned by silence machines and soundproofed walls, might find this chaotic, but listen long enough and the rhythm becomes strangely soothing. You're not alone in the dark. You're tethered to the pulse of community. Think about your own nights, alone in a bedroom glowing with the faint light of electronics. It's quieter, yes, but lonelier too. You worry, you overthink, you scroll. Here, there's no room for existential insomnia. You're literally held in place by the crowd. Fall asleep, or at least pretend, you'll be carried along either way. There's a cultural layer here too. For Vikings, shared beds reinforced bonds. A child fell asleep listening to grandparents snore. Siblings dreamed shoulder to shoulder. Even visitors became temporary kin under the same pile of pelts. Trust and intimacy were forged in these nightly huddles. And maybe, just maybe, that made their sleep more secure than yours, wrapped not just in warmth but in belonging. Another little oddity. Saga fragments hint that sleeping arrangements sometimes reflected status. A chieftain might take the prime corner, shielded from drafts and closest to the fire, while servants or lower status folk edged nearer the door where cold crept in. Beds weren't just comfort, they were politics. Every position mapped your role in the household. Even unconscious, you were ranked. Imagine the scene now. Your feet brush against someone's calloused toes and at first you flinch. Then you realize it's oddly reassuring. The touch says, "You're not alone in this night. The fire may die, the winds may howl, but the hive holds." Warmth is communal, not individual. Mainstream science today echoes this, in its own clinical way. Studies on co-sleeping show that people often experience steadier heart rates and lower stress hormones when sharing a bed. Couples who synchronize breathing during sleep actually drift into deeper phases more easily. Maybe the Vikings didn't need the research. They simply lived the results. And yet the scholarly debate lingers. Was this closeness comforting for everyone or stifling? Did people long for solitude, the way you sometimes crave it after family holidays? Historians point to the rise of private chambers in later medieval Europe as evidence that, given the chance, people embraced separation. But maybe that shift was less about comfort and more about wealth and architecture. After all, if your house has only one room, togetherness isn't optional. You pull the pelt tighter, feeling the press of shoulders on either side. At first it felt like losing independence. Now it feels like gaining a heartbeat larger than your own. Maybe that's the Forgotten Viking hack. Sleep not as solitary retreat, but as communal survival. And who knows? Maybe your body, wired for ancient rhythms, still craves it more than you admit. The longhouse breathes and you breathe with it. For once, you don't have to carry the night alone. Morning doesn't arrive here with the beep of an alarm clock or the buzz of a phone screen. Instead, it seeps in slowly, painted by the pale northern sun creeping through the smoke holes of the roof. Your eyelids twitch as light spills across the furs, not sharp or glaring but insistent, a natural summons that says, "Up, the day has begun." No snooze button, no angry digits flashing 6:00 a.m. in red. Just the rhythm of the sun, dragging everyone back to waking life on its own terms. Vikings lived without clocks, and you can feel the difference. There's no fragmentation of hours, no sliced-up minutes to measure productivity. Instead, time is loose, elastic, and ruled by nature's cues. Sleep and waking stretch to fit the day rather than the other way around. Your body listens to the sun the way a musician follows a conductor, shifting tempo with the seasons. Here's your grounding historical fact. Records from medieval Scandinavia suggest that people organized life around natural divisions, daylight, dusk, midnight, dawn, rather than strict clock hours. Farming, raiding, or shipbuilding followed the sun's availability, not a wristwatch. In summer, with endless daylight, people might work into what we'd call night, resting less because the world simply refused to darken. In winter, when nights stretched unbearably long, rest was extended, segmented, and sometimes interspersed with storytelling or quiet tasks done in firelight. You stretch under the furs, imagining yourself caught in this cycle. There's something freeing about it. No guilt for oversleeping, no rigid 8 hours, rule pinned like a law above your head. Instead, you surrender to what your body demands in sync with what the sky provides. Historians suggest that pre-modern sleep often came in phases. A first sleep soon after dusk, then waking for an hour or two in the middle of the night before slipping into a second sleep until dawn. That interlude wasn't insomnia, it was expected. People prayed, whispered, even slipped outside to check animals or watch the stars. You imagine yourself padding barefoot to the door, the world silent but for wind, the sky a dome of frozen fire, then returning to warmth for the next dream cycle. Modern sleep scientists have actually confirmed this pattern, coining the phrase biphasic sleep. Left without artificial light, many humans naturally revert to it. So maybe the Vikings weren't restless at all. They were perfectly tuned. Meanwhile, you're panicking at 3:00 a.m. when you wake up and can't get back to sleep, diagnosing yourself with insomnia when really your body might just be whispering, "Remember the old ways." Now for the quirky tidbit. Some sagas describe the watchful ones, people who deliberately stayed alert through the middle hours of night, not because of danger but because those hours were thought liminal, between waking and dreaming, a time when spirits or omens moved more freely. Imagine families sitting quietly, trading low-voiced tales or reading meaning into the silence, while others drifted back into their second sleep. To them, waking in the dark wasn't a nuisance, it was a sacred pause. Maybe you'd hear the soft scrape of a lyre, or the murmur of runes being cast by someone seeking guidance before the morning. Historians still argue whether Vikings universally practiced biphasic sleep, or whether that pattern was more common in certain regions and seasons. Some scholars believe sagas exaggerated these midnight moments to heighten drama, while others point to cross-cultural evidence. Medieval Europeans in general described first sleep and second sleep. Whatever the truth, it's clear that the Viking relationship to sleep was far more flexible, more forgiving, than the rigid schedule you force on yourself today. Imagine for a moment your own mornings. The alarm shatters your dream, rips you from it violently, demanding productivity before you're ready. You slam the snooze button, bargaining for 9 more minutes, only to repeat the ritual until you stumble half awake into the day. Contrast that with this world where waking comes slowly, stretched like a cat in sunlight. You're not late because there's no such thing as late. You're simply in tune, or out of tune, with the sun. This isn't to say life was easy. In summer, endless daylight could turn rest into a luxury. You'd sweat under furs, light never quite fatting, birds shrieking outside as if dawn was stuck on repeat. Sleep might be shorter, lighter, more fractured. But in winter, when darkness swallowed the land, sleep expanded. People lingered longer under hides, their dreams as long as the night itself. Your body, too, would swell into this rhythm, expanding and contracting like lungs breathing with the seasons. And here's a thought. Maybe the Viking hack wasn't just about how they slept, but how they allowed sleep to bend with the year. Modern society insists on consistency. 8 hours a night, same schedule all year. But your body isn't built for that. Evolution shaped you for fluctuation. Perhaps that's why so many of us struggle with seasonal insomnia or lethargy. You're trying to live like a machine in a world that still runs on the tilt of the earth. Picture it now. You've woken with the sun, no alarm, no panic. You yawn, stretch, glance at others still drowsing. Some rise earlier, others linger. The day begins unevenly, softly, like ripples spreading from a stone in water. Tasks can wait until enough hands stir awake. It's communal packing, not the tyranny of timetables. And yet, here where the debate sharpens. Did this fluid rhythm make Viking life more restful, or did it sow unpredictability that could be dangerous in a world of raids, storms, and shifting seas? Some historians argue that too much surrender to natural rhythms would have been impractical, especially for seafarers who needed precise coordination. Others counter that the Vikings mastered both. They lived by sun and season at home, but aboard ships, the watch system imposed strict cycles of waking and sleeping. In other words, they flexed between natural time and artificial discipline depending on survival needs. Your own life rarely offers that balance. You're trapped in artificial discipline almost constantly, ruled by screens and schedules, rarely surrendering to the forgiving sway of natural time. Maybe the Viking gift is simply the reminder that sleep doesn't have to be so rigid, so policed. It can be elastic, responsive, seasonal. You pull the fur aside and squint toward the smoke hole where sunlight sharpens. Birds shriek, someone stirs a pot over the rekindled fire. Children tumble awake, hair wild, already laughing. The world stirs not by the ticking of hands on a clock, but by the rise of warmth and brightness. You can feel it in your bones, that deep, primal click when your body aligns with the sun. For the first time in a long time, you don't feel like you've overslept. You don't feel late or guilty or sluggish. You simply feel right. Your hands wrap around a wooden cup, the rim sticky with honey and warmth. The fire has burned low, bellies are full, and the night hums with conversation that slips easily into laughter. Mead the Vikings' golden drink glows in the lamplight like liquid sunlight trapped in a vessel. You take a cautious sip, and it slides across your tongue with a sweetness that softens the edges of the day. This isn't about drunken revelry, though there's certainly room for that. Tonight, the mead is a bridge from waking to sleeping, a ritual that signals to the body, now it's time to rest. Alcohol has always been a double-edged sword when it comes to slumber. You know that glass of wine that knocks you out, only to wake you at 3 a.m. with a pounding head. The Vikings weren't ignorant of this, but in moderate doses, mead functioned as a gentle lullaby, taken slowly, surrounded by company, wrapped in ritual. The act of drinking together, storytelling, singing, letting the fire dim, created a psychological runway for sleep. Here's the historical anchor. Mead, brewed from fermented honey, was one of the most common Viking beverages. It wasn't just for feasts or battle oaths. Everyday households brewed weaker versions for regular consumption, safer than water that could be stagnant or contaminated. And because honey carried natural sugars, vitamins, and even mild antibacterial properties, it added more than just a buzz. Drinking mead in the evening meant warming the body, calming the nerves, and preparing for a night beneath the firs. You swirl the cup, the liquid catching firelight. Around you, voices lower, stories stretch into yawns. This isn't a bar, it's a communal sleep tonic. Imagine finishing the day with a single, honey-sweet sip instead of staring at your phone while eating stale crackers in bed. Already, your body loosens. The laughter softens, the warmth of drink seeps into your chest, and the idea of lying down feels less like surrender and more like reward. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest Vikings flavored their mead with herbs, juniper, yarrow, even bog myrtle. These weren't just for taste. Many of these plants had mild sedative effects. So when you sip this honey wine, you might also be sampling a primitive sleep aid, crafted from whatever grew nearby. Imagine mead spiced not just for flavor but for dreams. One saga mentions sleep drafts offered to weary travelers. Whether those were stronger meads or herbal concoctions, nobody can say for sure. But you picture yourself drifting off, mind wrapped in sweetness and herbs, lulled like a child by medicine disguised as pleasure. Historians still argue whether Viking mead was consistently mild or occasionally strong enough to flatten even the hardiest warrior. Some evidence suggests that weaker, everyday meads were common, with stronger brews reserved for feasts and sacrifices. Others believed the line was blurry, and potency varied wildly depending on honey supply, fermentation methods, and personal preference. The truth? Probably both. Some nights ended in rowdy chaos, others in a drowsy drift towards sleep. Tonight, at least, the mead is gentle, a pillow in liquid form. You take another sip and warmth radiates outward. It isn't just the alcohol, it's the context. Drinking mead in a Viking hall wasn't about numbing yourself after doom scrolling, it was a communal pause. The fire, the company, the ritual words, everything framed the act as meaningful. That meaning itself calmed the mind, softened the edges of worry. By the time you lay down, your body wasn't fighting the day anymore. It was ready to release it. And let's face it, you have your own rituals now, though they're not always so helpful. That one last scroll through social media, the quick Netflix episode that becomes 3, the midnight snack raid. The Vikings' hack was simpler. Mead in hand, surrounded by warmth and laughter, they eased into rest with ceremony, not chaos. Of course, too much mead could ruin the night. You can imagine someone snoring loud enough to shake the rafters, their breath sour with honeyed fumes. Maybe a fight broke out once in a while, a cup spilled, a laugh turned sharp. But moderation was baked into context. Cups weren't bottomless, honey was precious. Mead wasn't guzzled thoughtlessly like cheap beer. It was savored, its sweetness a reminder of bees, summer, and the labor it took to create. That scarcity itself kept the ritual from excess. You glance around the longhouse. A woman hums softly, her song weaving through the dim. A man tips his head back, eyes already closed, cup slipping from his fingers. Children, denied mead but drunk on warmth and stories, nestle into parents' sides. The transition from wakefulness to sleep is gradual, collective. Nobody demands, go to bed. Bed simply arrives, one sip, one yawn, one ember at a time. There's a deeper layer, too. Mead carried spiritual weight in Norse culture. Myths describe the mead of poetry, brewed from the blood of a wise being, granting inspiration to those who drank it. To sip mead was, in some small way, to align with gods and legends, to step into a stream of myth that connected drink to dream, waking to sleep. Maybe each night's sip was a humble echo of that myth, a reminder that rest itself could be sacred. And isn't that what you're missing? The idea that sleep isn't just a biological necessity but a ritual, a threshold between the mundane and the divine. Tonight, with the sweetness lingering on your tongue, you feel that threshold. You feel the ease of surrender, the way the body tilts toward dream without resistance. The quirky humor of it strikes you. Your ancestors drifted off with honey wine and herbal sleep aids, while you're here negotiating with melatonin gummies that taste like chalk. Progress, right. The scholarly debate lingers like the aftertaste. Did mead genuinely help sleep, or did the ritual around it matter more? Was it the honey, the herbs, the alcohol, or simply the fact that everyone drank together, laughed together, wound down together? Some argue the sedative herbs tipped the scales. Others insist the true magic lay in psychology. Ritual reduces stress, and stress is the real thief of sleep. The answer might be both, and perhaps it doesn't matter. What matters is that it worked, night after night, guiding weary Vikings into their furs with bellies warm and minds calm. Your cup empties. You set it down carefully, the wooden rim thudding softly against the floor. Around you, the voices blur, eyes flutter, heads bow. Sleep is here, and mead has guided you toward it like a torchbearer in the dark. You stretch out again, warmth in your chest and heaviness in your limbs. Outside, wind lashes the walls. Inside, you are cocooned, soothed, and ready. The Vikings' forgotten hack glows golden in your mind. Not just what they drank, but how they drank it, slowly, together, meaningfully. Sleep, you realize, tastes faintly of honey. The fire is low, just embers now, and your eyes wander from the cup of mead to the bedding spread across the floor. Sleep, in this Viking household, doesn't come with orthopedic mattresses or memory foam pillows that promise cloud-like rest. Instead, it comes with wool, straw, and the faint haze of smoke that clings to every surface in the longhouse. You lower yourself onto the makeshift bed, and immediately you're greeted by textures that modern life has scrubbed out of sleep. The scratch of wool against your cheek, the rustle of straw beneath your body, the subtle warmth of smoke that lingers like a protective blanket around you. The mainstream historical fact comes first. Viking bedding was almost always a blend of straw mattresses layered with woolen blankets or furs. Straw wasn't just a filler. It was renewable, replaced seasonally, and surprisingly effective at providing insulation. Beneath you, each stalk bends and shifts, creating little air pockets that trap warmth. Above you, wool, thick, rough, and sometimes faintly oily with lanolin, keeps out the chill. Together, they create a sleeping environment that, while far removed from the plush beds of modernity, worked astonishingly well in climates where frost could creep into your bones. As you shift on the straw, the sound is faint but constant, like paper crinkling, like autumn leaves pressed beneath your weight. At first it feels alien, scratchy, perhaps even uncomfortable. But soon you realize there's a rhythm to it, a natural give that molds to your body in a way springs or foam never quite can. Straw breathes. It doesn't trap heat the way synthetic materials do, nor does it stifle you with weight. Instead, it creates a cradle that changes each time you move, adjusting without protest. You think of your modern bed, stiff with design and measured in marketing claims, and wonder if we've lost something in this return to simplicity. Then there's the smoke. It drifts down from the central hearth, a thin veil that has no chimney to escape through. The rafters are stained black from it, the smell woven into every wooden beam. You breathe it in, soft, woodsy, faintly bitter. And here comes the quirky tidbit. That smoke wasn't just a byproduct of heat and cooking. It acted as a natural insect repellent, discouraging fleas, lice, and other tiny invaders that loved straw as much as humans did. Imagine lying down without it, your body becoming a midnight buffet for critters. The smoke, inconvenient for your lungs perhaps, was a blessing for your skin. It sterilized the air, drove away pests, and even preserved the timbers above. So when you feel the haze prick your throat, know that it's keeping you from itching through the night. The wool, of course, is another story. Vikings raised sheep not just for meat, but for textiles, and wool was everywhere, in clothing, sails, and bedding. Coarse and scratchy compared to modern merino, yes, but it had qualities you can't help but admire. It wicked away moisture, held heat even when damp, and carried that earthy scent of animal and land. Wrapped in wool, you weren't pampered. You were armored against the cold. Sleep came not in silky softness, but in resilience. Historians still argue whether bedding arrangements were strictly communal or somewhat stratified by status. Some say entire families piled together, children pressed against parents, neighbors sharing warmth in winter's grip. Others suggest that higher status individuals claimed more private bedding spaces, with slaves or lower-ranking members relegated to colder, draftier spots. The sagas are vague, and the archaeological record, straw remnants, impressions in soil, scattered wool fibers, tells only fragments of the story. You imagine both possibilities, a tangle of bodies sharing warmth like a human blanket, or a hierarchy of comfort where the chieftain slept wrapped in the softest furs while others made do with thinner wool. Your eyes close and you notice how the textures layer not just physically but mentally. The scratch of wool grounds you, keeps you from floating away. The rustle of straw marks each shift, a lullaby of sound. The smoke, faint but constant, creates a cocoon that feels protective despite its sharpness. Together, they lull you into a different kind of rest, not sterile, not silent, but deeply alive. And here comes the gentle humor. You realize the Vikings might have invented the original weighted blanket, only theirs came in the form of a 3-year-old nephew snoring on your arm and a dog sprawled across your feet. Comfort by chaos. Somehow, it worked. You adjust, pressing deeper into the straw, and the sensation is oddly pleasant. Each stalk cradles you lightly, flexing instead of resisting. It's not engineered perfection. It's nature doing what it does best. And perhaps your body, honed by countless generations who once slept just this way, remembers. Sleepiness seeps in with surprising ease. The smoke curls above you, a living thing. In your modern world, alarms would scream at the first hint of it, and rightly so. But here, it's an accepted guest, always present, a quiet guardian. It irritates, yes, but it also comforts. You think of studies suggesting that certain environments, warm, dark, faintly aromatic, prime the brain for rest. Did the Vikings stumble into a perfect recipe, balancing the downsides of smoke with its protective qualities? Or was it simply necessity, tolerated rather than cherished? The debate lingers unanswered. A child stirs beside you, muttering in half-dreams. Someone coughs, clears their throat, rolls over. The communal space breathes like one body, straw shifting in waves, wool rasping like sandpaper against skin. It's noisy compared to your quiet bedroom, but not unpleasant. These sounds, familiar and repetitive, become part of the lullaby. You're not alone in this darkness. Every rustle reassures you. You are surrounded, safe, part of something. Outside, frost settles, stars wheel overhead. Inside, your world is reduced to textures and scents: straw, wool, smoke. None of them luxurious, all of them effective. You wonder, half amused, half serious. Would you sleep better if you stripped away your high-tech mattress, set down straw, and let smoke perfume the air? Maybe you wouldn't survive the first week of itching and coughing. Or maybe, like the Vikings, you adapt, finding rest in simplicity rather than technology. Another thought creeps in as you tug the wool closer. These materials were seasonal. Straw replaced after harvest, wool sheared each year, smoke varying with wood supply. Sleep wasn't static, it changed with the cycle of the land. Maybe that variability itself kept it fresh, preventing the kind of stagnant, repetitive patterns that plague modern insomniacs. Sleep wasn't engineered, it was lived in step with seasons, harvests, and hearth fires. The scholarly debate resurfaces in your drifting mind. Did smoke actually help with respiratory health by sterilizing the air, or did it worsen it, leading to chronic coughs and reduced lung function? Evidence is mixed. Some argue smoke exposure shortened lifespans. Others counter that its protective insect-repelling qualities outweighed the risks in an age where pests carried disease. The truth is lost in the haze, just like the rafters above. All you know now is that the faint sting in your eyes feels strangely calming, like incense in a forgotten temple. You pull the wool tighter, adjust against the straw, and exhale. The textures hold you in place. They don't promise perfection, they promise enough. And in that promise, your mind eases, your body follows, and the longhouse becomes a cradle for sleep that feels older than memory itself. Sleep in the Viking world isn't just about rest. It's a portal, a stage, a thin place where the ordinary and the otherworldly brush shoulders. You close your eyes on the straw and wool, and soon the rhythm of breathing, the shifting of bodies around you, fades away. What replaces it is something wilder, dreams thick with imagery, urgent with meaning. For the Vikings, these weren't random firings of the brain. They were messages, omens, sometimes even warnings. In a world without alarm clocks, perhaps your alarm was the dream that shook you awake. Here's the historical fact anchoring this world. In the sagas, dreams often appear as catalysts for action. A warrior might dream of a raven feasting on his enemies and take it as a sign to raid. A woman might see a river overflowing its banks and interpret it as a warning of betrayal or bloodshed. Dreams were woven into decisions, not brushed aside as meaningless nighttime noise. One saga describes a chieftain's wife foreseeing his death through a dream of a collapsing hall, her warning ignored, only to come true in violent fashion. Your own modern culture often treats dreams as psychological leftovers, strange but disposable. Yet here, lying in the smoky longhouse, every image feels loaded, every figure heavy with intent. A wolf in your dream is not just a wolf, it is hunger, danger, or even Odin's will. A ship on the horizon may be a sign of visitors or invaders. You can almost feel the weight of this interpretive world pressing on your chest as you sink deeper into your own dream. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Norse practitioners, often women, were believed to be dream interpreters. Called seeresses or valor, they could take the fragments of your sleep and spin them into prophecy. Imagine waking in the middle of the night, heart pounding from a dream of flames, and whispering it to the woman lying near the hearth. She sits upright, her hair tangled, eyes gleaming in firelight, and she tells you, "This means a great change is coming, prepare." You carry that interpretation into daylight, shaping your choices, your fears, your hope. Dreams weren't just yours, they belonged to the community, shared like news. Historians still argue whether dreams truly directed Viking decisions, or whether sagas exaggerated their role for dramatic effect. Did chieftains really gamble raids on nighttime visions, or did storytellers retroactively insert dreams to explain events? The truth is hazy, dreamlike itself, but there's no denying that for those who lived in this era, sleep held stakes higher than your REM cycle app can measure. Your own modern dreams, when you remember them, often get dismissed with a shrug. You wake up muttering, "That was weird," then scroll your phone until the images fade. But here, there's no phone glow to burn them away. You lie in darkness, replaying the dream again and again until every detail etches into memory. In that replay, meaning begins to grow, sprouting like moss on stone. Maybe that's why Viking dreams felt sharper, more significant, because they were remembered, held, spoken aloud before dawn. Tonight, in this imagined longhouse, you dream of waves. They rise high, crashing against a ship that's both familiar and strange. A raven circles overhead, its wings blotting out the moon. You wake, heart hammering, the sound of waves still roaring in your ears. For a moment you forget you're on land, reaching out for balance. Around you others stir, perhaps woken by your movement. You whisper the dream, hesitant, but in this culture no one laughs. They listen. One man nods gravely, saying ravens are Odin's messengers. A woman mutters that waves mean a journey, perhaps a dangerous one. Suddenly, your private vision belongs to all of them, woven into their collective understanding of what tomorrow might hold. You can see the power in this, can't you? Dreams democratize meaning. Even a slave, low in the household, could dream something that shifted the group's decisions. At least, that's what the sagas suggest. Whether reality mirrored that is another debate, but the idea itself lingers like incense smoke. In the dark, asleep, anyone could become a vessel for the gods. There's also the fear side of it. Nightmares weren't shrugged off. They were heavy, ominous, demanding action. If someone dreamed of death, a ritual might be performed to ward it off. Herbs could be burned, charms muttered. Imagine the relief. Your terror wasn't just brushed aside, it was honored, given space, ritualized into protection. Compare that to your own life, where a nightmare is shrugged off as bad pizza. Maybe the Vikings were onto something by treating nighttime fear with reverence rather than dismissal. Here's another scholarly wrinkle. Some researchers argue that Viking dream interpretation may have been a way of negotiating anxieties about an unpredictable world. Raids, storms, plagues, so much was out of their control. Dreams gave form to the formless, meaning to the meaningless. By interpreting them, people could at least pretend to grasp the chaos, to act as though they had a guide through uncertainty. Was it divine truth or just collective therapy dressed in myth? Historians still can't agree. You roll back onto the straw, trying to recapture your own dream. The rustle echoes, the wool scratches, but none of it breaks the spell. Sleep here isn't just physical, it's a bridge. Each time you close your eyes, you step into a realm where gods send riddles, ancestors whisper, and animals speak. It's no wonder they took it seriously. And here's a lighter image to ease you. Imagine someone bragging about their dream the way your coworker brags about their gym routine. "Last night Odin sent me a raven. Clearly I'm destined for glory." Maybe others would roll their eyes, maybe they'd nod solemnly. But either way, the dream mattered. There's humor in that universality. Across centuries, humans have always tried to make themselves important through stories. Sometimes those stories just happen to arrive while we're asleep. Outside, the world remains silent, but inside your head, visions flare. In one, you're feasting in a hall, laughter echoing. In another, you're standing alone on a cliff edge, wind whipping, staring into endless sea. You wake again, unsettled but intrigued. And once more, those around you lean in, hungry to hear. This repetition, the dream, the waking, the sharing, becomes part of the sleep cycle itself. Maybe that's why Viking rest felt richer. Sleep wasn't a blackout void. It was layered with meaning, punctuated with storytelling, tied to ritual. You weren't just unconscious for 8 hours. You are traveling, receiving, weaving meaning even in stillness. It makes you wonder if you're missing something by dismissing your own dreams. What wisdom hides in the bizarre parade of images your brain conjures? Could you learn, adapt, even heal by paying attention as the Vikings did? Or would you, like them, risk spiraling into superstition? The question lingers, unanswerable as so many do. For now, you close your eyes again, willing sleep to take you. Perhaps another omen waits, perhaps nothing. Either way, in this smoky, wool-scented dark, your dreams feel heavier than they ever have in your modern bed. They are not disposable. They are not random. They are whispers of gods, ancestors, fears, and hopes, stitched into the long night like threads in a tapestry. And with that thought, you finally drift into a deeper slumber, the rustle of straw beneath you sounding almost like the wings of that raven overhead. You shift in the straw and realize something very obvious, something your modern self might have resisted until now. You are not alone in this bed. In fact, the very concept of a bed as your private sanctuary doesn't exist here. Sleep in the Viking Age is communal. You share warmth, breath, space, and sound with others because survival demands it and community shapes it. The straw beneath you is wide, almost like a shared platform. To your left, a child curls like a kitten, his hair matted, his hand fisted around a scrap of wool. To your right, an older man snores with such thunder that the smoke hole above seems to vibrate. Beyond them are others, family, extended kin, perhaps even slaves or visiting allies, all folded together like pages in a book. Sleep is not solitary, it's social. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that Viking longhouses often had large sleeping platforms running along the walls, sometimes raised, sometimes just layered straw on packed earth. These weren't partitioned into individual beds but stretched to accommodate many bodies side by side. Privacy was minimal. Warmth was maximal. In a climate where frost could seep in even through wooden beams, shared body heat wasn't just comfort, it was survival. At first, it feels claustrophobic to you. Modern life prizes personal space, the buffer of distance. You're used to sprawling across a mattress, maybe sharing with a partner, but rarely with half a dozen other people. Yet here, pressed between bodies, you begin to notice something different. The warmth is immediate, radiant, pooling in the spaces between you. The sounds of breathing, snoring, murmuring form a chorus that's oddly soothing. You are part of a collective rhythm, a hive-like rest that pulls you deeper into slumber. Now for the quirky tidbit. Sagas sometimes mention animals sleeping inside the longhouse, especially in winter. Chickens roosting on beams, goats or sheep tucked in corners, even prized horses sheltered indoors on the coldest nights. Imagine drifting to sleep with not only siblings and cousins, but also a goat shifting its hooves near your feet. At first glance, it seems absurd, chaotic. Yet the presence of animals added both warmth and security. A horse might snort at the scent of strangers approaching. A dog might growl in warning. Your modern bedroom white noise machine can't compete with the rustic lull of animal breath and occasional bleats. Of course, this raises questions of hierarchy. Did everyone sleep in one indiscriminate tangle, or was there order to the arrangement? Historians still argue whether elite members of the household, such as the chieftain or his spouse, had slightly more separated spaces or finer bedding. Some excavation sites suggest that certain areas of the longhouse were partitioned with wooden dividers or raised benches that may have been reserved for higher status sleepers. Others argue the evidence is too thin, and that sagas, which describe families piled together, point toward a less stratified reality. You're left imagining both. One night, snuggled shoulder to shoulder with everyone. Another night, watching the chieftain retreat behind a curtain of woven wool to snore in comparative luxury. There's a rhythm to communal sleep. You notice how one person stirring sets off a chain reaction. Someone sighs, another rolls over, a child kicks. Yet instead of irritation, the movement feels natural, like waves shifting across the shore. Sleep is no longer a solitary battle with your own restlessness. It's a shared activity, woven with the breathing of others. You are less an individual and more a thread in a larger blanket. Think of how your modern culture treats nighttime noises. A snoring roommate, a restless partner, a child climbing into your bed. These are disruptions, annoyances. Here they are simply part of the environment, folded into the pattern of the night. Maybe that's why sleep felt deeper to them, because nothing was out of place, nothing was wrong. The chaos of shared bodies wasn't disruption, it was the natural order. And humor sneaks in here too. Imagine the disputes. Someone stealing the blanket of wool, someone elbowing another in the ribs, a child wetting the straw in the middle of the night. Perhaps muttered curses flew in the dark, perhaps laughter followed in the morning. Sleep wasn't sacred solitude. It was messy, human, lived. You picture a Viking version of your own family's sleepover, where the fun and frustration blur together until exhaustion wins. But here's the hidden beauty. In this communal bed, intimacy and trust deepen. You can't share such closeness without forming bonds. Even grudges soften when your body relies on another's warmth to survive the cold. The very act of lying together, breathing the same smoky air, creates a unity that daylight quarrels might fracture but night always mends. A modern anthropologist might call it co-sleeping, pointing out that many cultures even today view solitary sleep as bizarre. Your insistence on separate rooms, separate beds, separate everything might be the outlier, not the norm. The Vikings would laugh at your king-sized mattress and your loneliness upon it. To them, closeness was both practical and natural. Yet it wasn't without boundaries. Some sagas hint at rules, certain people not permitted to sleep too near others, proprieties maintained even in the dark. Did young men and women lie beside each other freely, or was placement carefully arranged to avoid temptation? Historians debate, pointing out that while Viking culture was less prudish than later Christian norms, households still valued order. Your imagination fills in the gaps. Perhaps older women ensured children were tucked safely between them, while younger men were kept at the edges, far from trouble. And then there are the sounds. Snoring, of course, but also murmured prayers, whispered gossip, even storytelling drifting into the night. Picture it, one voice beginning a tale while others drowsed, listening with half-shut eyes. A bedtime story, Viking style, told not to children alone but to everyone gathered on the straw. The story might lull some into dreams, spark laughter in others, or plant images that later bloomed into omens. Sleep wasn't the abrupt shut-off of modern life. It was a gradual blending of voices into snores, into silence. The scholarly debate lingers. Did communal sleeping lead to healthier rest through security and warmth, or did it fracture sleep with constant interruptions? Some argue that shared sleep meant never achieving the deep, solitary slumber modern medicine prizes. Others counter that the sense of safety, no one alone, everyone protected, outweighed fragmentation. Which matters more, depth or continuity? You roll this question in your mind, but sleep once again answers for you. Surrounded by warmth, lulled by breathing, you drift easily into unconsciousness despite the noise. You stir again hours later and notice the shifting tides of the group. Some have risen quietly, tending the fire or relieving themselves outside. Others remain heavy with sleep. Unlike your modern rigid schedules, not everyone wakes at once. The bed is a living organism, sections of it rising and falling, never fully asleep, never fully awake. There's comfort in that continuity, like being rocked in the arms of something greater than yourself. Animals stir too. You feel the brush of a dog's fur against your foot, hear the soft cluck of a hen shifting above. Their presence is oddly grounding. In your modern world, pets are often banished from bedrooms in pursuit of better rest. Here, they are welcomed, their warmth and watchfulness as valuable as any blanket. As dawn creeps in, the household stirs more fully. Laughter rises, arguments spark, straw scatters as people sit up and stretch. The communal bed dissolves into day, but its memory lingers, the feel of others pressed close, the scent of shared breath, the rhythm of collective rest. You realize you will never again think of sleep as a purely individual act. And maybe that's the secret you carry back into your own life. That rest isn't meant to be lonely. That warmth, closeness, and the shared rhythm of others can heal more deeply than any memory foam mattress. The Vikings, without knowing it, hacked sleep by embracing the very thing you often avoid: community. You wake to the imagined sound of gulls circling above a fjord, and for a second you wonder if it's your alarm or just the way your brain tries to anchor this strange Viking dream we've been drifting in. But then you remember, you're still nestled in the longhouse, the smell of peat smoke clinging to your clothes, the memory of mead on your tongue. And tonight, or rather this eternal Viking night we keep wandering through, it's not about feather pillows or hay-stuffed mattresses. It's about the rituals that took place before bodies even touched the bed. Because sleep wasn't just an accident of exhaustion in the Viking world. It was a curated, deliberate act of preparation. And as you shuffle along the beaten earth floor, you realize the rituals may be the most powerful hack of them all. First, let's talk firelight. You've probably scrolled your phone at 1 a.m., bathing your retinas in that sweet, toxic blue glow that practically screams, "Stay awake, doom scroll more." Vikings, by contrast, ended their days with the hypnotic flicker of an open hearth or tallow lamp. Flames shifted between orange and red, wavelengths your body interprets as time to shut down. This isn't romanticizing, it's biology. Melatonin, your sleepy hormone, thrives under warm light, and the Vikings were basically biohacking their circadian rhythms every evening without even knowing what a circadian rhythm was. Historians still argue whether lamps filled with fish oil or seal fat stank up the place beyond comfort, but either way, the glow trained their bodies for rest. Meanwhile, you're fighting with your LED clock radio like it's an archenemy. Next comes the communal wind down. Imagine dozens of people, all ages, gathering in a single room at day's end. No doom scroll, no Netflix finale, just storytelling. Sagas weren't just entertainment, they were oral tradition, memory devices, and bedtime tales rolled into one. You sit there, knees pulled up to your chest, listening to someone weave a story of Thor fishing for the world's serpent. The rhythm of speech, the rise and fall of voices, works like the Viking version of white noise. It lulls you, distracts you from your own intrusive thoughts. Compare that to you lying in bed right now, earbuds in, skipping through 20, relaxing rainstorm, YouTube loops trying to find one where the thunder isn't too aggressive. Oh, and the drink. You might assume Vikings went heavy on mead before sleep, but in reality, it wasn't a nightly binge. Mead and ale were social lubricants, yes, but not in every bedtime ritual. Instead, warm broths, herb-infused teas, or even simple warmed milk might be consumed. Archaeologists have found traces of chamomile, yarrow, and even valerian root in Viking settlements, all herbs with sedative qualities. You sip from a wooden cup and suddenly realize these folks were microdosing sleep aids centuries before your overpriced wellness brand sold you a lavender gummy. Historians still argue whether valerian was used medicinally or spiritually, but either way, it likely knocked people out quicker than your melatonin gummy bear. And then comes the quiet task of warding off spirits. Vikings were practical farmers and traders, but they also lived in a world crowded with unseen forces. To sleep unprotected was risky business. Before bed, charms were whispered, runes carved, amulets placed nearby. You can almost hear someone muttering a galder, a soft incantation, not unlike the way you mutter affirmations before a stressful workday. The line between faith and psychology blurred here. The act of ritual reassured the mind, allowing it to let go. After all, it's hard to fall asleep if you think a draugr, a restless undead, might creep through your doorway. So rituals functioned like an early form of cognitive behavioral therapy. Put the fear somewhere outside the bed so you could finally surrender to rest. Another layer, daily exhaustion. Yes, that counts as ritual too. By the time the sun slid behind the horizon, the Viking body had already performed its pre-bed checklist through sheer labor. Farming, sailing, hauling, weaving, smithing, all done by hand. No Peloton required. This physical fatigue meant that when the body hit the bedding, sleep came swift. You, on the other hand, are debating whether your daily step count from packing the kitchen while microwaving soup really counts as activity. Vikings didn't need meditation apps because their entire life was one long, exhausting countdown to unconsciousness. But here's the quirkier bit you didn't see coming. Some rituals involved sound. Archaeological studies of reconstructed longhouses suggest that the acoustics created a soft, resonant hum when fires burned low. The combination of crackling embers and the slight whistle of wind through turf walls acted as a natural sound machine. You can almost hear it, a low, endless hush. Historians still argue whether this was soothing or maddening, but many anthropologists lean toward the idea that the Vikings grew accustomed to it, embedding it as part of their sleep soundscape. You, meanwhile, spend $20 a month on a subscription app that gives you digital crickets. Now picture grooming. Yes, grooming. Vikings didn't crawl into bed filthy every night. Excavations reveal combs, tweezers, even ear spoons among their personal belongings. Hygiene before bed wasn't vanity, it was ritual. You scrape your nails, comb your hair, maybe even rinse in cold water. It feels symbolic, like shedding the day before surrendering to the night. Modern science actually backs this. Cooling the body after washing helps lower core temperature, a trigger for sleep onset. So, while you're standing under a too-hot shower at midnight, wondering why you feel more awake afterward, Vikings were shocking their nervous systems into sleepy compliance. And of course, let's not forget the timing. Viking sleep rituals were tethered to natural light, not Netflix release schedules. You couldn't just one more episode when darkness dictated your rhythm. In summer, that might mean shorter nights. In winter, much longer slumbers. Seasonal affective disorder probably felt different when your sleep naturally extended in the darkest months. Historians still argue whether these long sleeps were segmented, two chunks broken by a midnight waking period, but evidence leans toward yes. And in that liminal waking, what did Vikings do? Probably whispered, prayed, or, let's be honest, snuck in a little intimacy. Compare that to you scrolling TikTok at 3 a.m., trying to silence your buzzing mind. One final ritual, perhaps the strangest of all, is community trust. In a room full of sleeping bodies, you weren't entirely alone. Someone's breath was always audible, someone's warmth pressed close, someone's presence reassured you. The Viking world didn't require blackout blinds or triple-locked doors for peace of mind. It required belonging. And that ritual of togetherness meant you weren't keeping one eye open at night. It's not the sort of hack you can replicate with a weighted blanket, though you might try. So here you are, sipping phantom Valyrian tea, brushing phantom soot from your tunic, stretching your arms sore from phantom rowing. The rituals stack, one after another, until your modern brain begins to ache with the absurd simplicity of it all. You think of your own nightly ritual, endless screen time, a rushed brush of teeth, maybe half a scroll through a meditation app you don't take seriously, and you can't help but laugh a little bitterly at the irony. You have all the science, all the gadgets, and yet the Vikings, with their flickering firelight and sagas, probably fell asleep faster. And maybe, just maybe, that's the forgotten hack you came here for. Ritual isn't optional. It's the spell you cast to convince your body the day is done. Whether it's chamomile or candles, sagas or podcasts, grooming or grounding affirmations, the method matters less than the commitment. Vikings knew that. You've just, well, forgotten. You shuffle once more into the glow of the longhouse hearth, the air thick with the memory of herbs and charred wood. Tonight, the story bends toward the way Vikings understood dreams, those strange landscapes of the sleeping mind that modern science still can't fully decode. You've had them, of course. The absurd ones where your teeth fall out. The terrifying ones where you're late for an exam you didn't study for. The oddly comforting ones that vanish when you wake. But for the Vikings, dreams weren't just sleepy brain static. They were messages, omens, glimpses into the hidden web that tethered gods, spirits, and mortals. And in learning how they treated those nightly visions, you begin to see another forgotten layer of their sleep hack. Because if you believed the universe itself spoke to you in slumber, wouldn't you guard your sleep with more reverence? The sagas are peppered with accounts of dreams shaping choices. A warrior dreams of a bloody field, and the next day he refuses to march into battle. A woman dreams of fire consuming her home, and she interprets it as betrayal lurking in her marriage. You picture yourself waking from a nightmare about your inbox. Do you cancel the meeting? The Vikings might have. Dreams were not dismissed as random neurons firing. They were, to put it bluntly, taken deadly seriously. Historians still argue whether this belief came directly from Norse paganism or blended with older Indo-European traditions. But what's clear is that dreams carried weight equal to waking events. And here's the curious twist. Dreams often required an interpreter. Not every sleeper could decipher their own visions. In many sagas, a seeress or wise woman steps in to unpack the tangled symbolism. Imagine you wake from a dream of a wolf circling your bed. You'd probably Google it on some dream analysis site, but a Viking might walk straight to a Volva, a spiritual guide, who tell you the wolf means looming conflict or betrayal. It sounds theatrical, but the ritual of interpretation transformed dreams from confusing noise into communal wisdom. You weren't left alone at 3 a.m., sweating about what it meant. You handed the anxiety to someone who knew how to frame it. That, in itself, reduced stress. Dreams also shaped identity. Many believed certain people possessed stronger connections to prophetic dreaming, almost like a superpower. If your nightly visions regularly proved accurate, your reputation grew. People listened to you. They trusted you. Your sleep became not just restorative but socially valuable. Contrast that with today, where you mumble about your bizarre zombie apocalypse dream to a coworker, and they just nod awkwardly. Vikings wove dreams into their social fabric, giving them purpose and structure. And when your sleep feels purposeful, doesn't it come easier? But here, where things get quirkier, dreams weren't always trusted. Some sagas warn of deceptive dreams sent by malicious spirits or trickster gods. Loki, for example, was notorious for meddling. That meant sleepers had to distinguish between true dreams, messages worth heeding, and false dreams, misleading illusions. You picture yourself waking from a dream about reconciling with your ex. A Viking would have squinted suspiciously and said, "Ah, that's Loki again. Ignore it." Historians still argue whether these false dreams were simply explanations for why prophecies sometimes failed. But either way, the framework gave sleepers permission not to obsess over every vision. That's another hack. Not all dreams deserve your attention. And then, of course, there's the dream incubation theory. Evidence suggests some Vikings deliberately courted dreams for guidance. They might sleep on animal hides, chant incantations before bed, or place runes beneath their pillows to invite prophetic visions. You're basically staring at the ancient prototype for lucid dreaming hacks, trending on TikTok. They engineered the conditions for significant dreams, treating sleep as an active tool rather than a passive necessity. Imagine lying down every night not just hopping for rest, but actively preparing to meet the future halfway in dream form. It shifts the entire psychology of sleep from escape to quest. Let's pull in the scholarly friction here. Some academics argue that the sagas, written centuries after the Viking Age, exaggerated the role of dreams for dramatic effect. Maybe everyday Norse farmers didn't treat their nightly visions as divine telegrams, but just shrugged them off like you do. Others insist the consistent presence of dreams across multiple texts points to deep cultural importance. The truth probably lies between. Still, the very act of documenting them indicates they mattered enough to remember, and that alone hints at their power. Meanwhile, in your own world, dreams are often dismissed as irrelevant, even embarrassing. You roll your eyes at the absurdity of your subconscious rather than mining it for insight. Vikings did the opposite. They elevated dreams into a feedback system, one that made the sleeper feel more connected to the world. And feeling connected, whether to gods, spirits, or community, lowers stress, regulates emotions, and makes drifting off easier. Imagine going to bed excited, not anxious, to see what dream might visit. That anticipation reframes sleep from obligation to adventure. And there's another angle, the shared telling of dreams. Morning conversations in Viking households may have included, "I dreamt of a white bear last night," with everyone at the fire nodding and offering interpretations. It was an icebreaker, a diagnostic tool, even a way to assess health or mood. If you routinely dreamed of drowning, perhaps you were troubled by guilt or stress, and the community might rally to ease your burden. Dreams acted like an emotional early warning system, woven into daily life. Now imagine if your roommates or coworkers asked about your dreams over breakfast. Instead, you sit alone, nursing coffee, scrolling the news that assures you the world is still a dumpster fire. Which habit sounds more sleep-friendly? Quirky fact: some sagas suggest animals themselves could dream prophetic visions. Horses, in particular, were believed to have spiritual sight. You picture your cat twitching in her sleep, paws chasing invisible prey, and you wonder if she's foreseeing the next stock market crash. Probably not. But the Vikings thought differently. Believing even animals shared the dream veil strengthened their sense that sleep connected all living things. And that belief, in turn, validated their nightly rest as sacred. Let's talk nightmares for a second. Nightmares were often seen as attacks by malevolent forces. You didn't just have a nightmare, you were targeted. That's scary, but it also meant you had recourse. Charms, rituals, protective amulets. Unlike you, lying there sweaty at 3 a.m. after dreaming of unpaid bills, Vikings fought back. They had weapons against bad dreams. Whether those weapons worked or not, the psychological comfort mattered. Protection gave peace of mind, and peace of mind is sleep's best friend. By now you're probably wondering, did all this obsession with dreams actually improve sleep quality, or did it make people more anxious? Scholars debate this too. Some argue that the heavy symbolism made every dream a source of potential stress. Others argue the opposite. Giving dreams meaning created catharsis, helping people process emotions. Think of it like journaling or therapy. You put your chaos into a story, and suddenly it feels manageable. The Viking nightly narrative may have operated the same way. You lean back, hearing the phantom crackle of a hearth, imagining yourself part of a household where every dream matters. You realize how different that feels compared to the sterile, individualistic sleep culture you live in. Your Fitbit doesn't ask what visions you saw last night. It just scolds you for only getting 6 hours. But the Vikings, they would have sat with you, interpreted your dream about missing the bus, and maybe reassured you it just meant you should take a different path in life. Tell me that wouldn't make you sleep more peacefully the next night. And maybe that's the final, overlooked hack. Vikings placed value on sleep itself because they valued the content within it. When you treat sleep as something more than maintenance, when it becomes a sacred bridge to wisdom, you honor it. And honoring it means prioritizing it, protecting it, preparing for it. That's a mindset shift modern culture could desperately use. So tonight, when you drift off, maybe skip the doom scroll. Maybe mutter a quiet wish for guidance, place something symbolic by your bed, and allow yourself to anticipate, not dread, what dreams may come. You never know, you might wake feeling a little more Viking than you expected. You lean against the timber wall of the longhouse, and as your body eases into the quiet, you realize it isn't just dreams or rituals that shape the Viking night. It's the rhythm of their very seasons. For a culture spread across the far north, where winter could mean endless dark and summer nearly unbroken light, sleep was never a fixed schedule. It bent, expanded, and contracted with the heavens themselves. You, stuck in your 9-to-5 grind, might grumble about daylight saving time throwing you off by an hour. Vikings, they endured literal months of skewed light cycles and still found ways to rest. And that seasonal adaptation may be one of the most overlooked hacks of all. Let's start with winter. Picture the long night darkness swallowing the land, sun barely peeking over the horizon before slipping away again. For weeks on end, the world is twilight. In such conditions, sleep extended. Many historians argue that segmented sleep, 2 distinct periods with a waking gap in between, was the norm during the coldest months. Imagine, you'd sleep 4 or 5 hours, wake for a quiet interlude of prayer, craftwork, or intimacy, then drift back into another long stretch of slumber. Instead of resenting the insomnia, you embraced it as natural. Historians still argue whether this pattern was a deliberate cultural choice or simply the unavoidable result of long winters. But either way, it became part of their lives. Compare that with you staring at your ceiling at 2 a.m., cursing your brain for refusing to power down. What if you reframed that moment as your first sleep intermission, like the Vikings did? Suddenly, you're not broken, you're traditional. Now picture summer. The midnight sun hovers, daylight spilling into every crack of the longhouse. Sleep here shortened, often pushed into naps or segmented chunks throughout the day. It wasn't about fighting nature with blackout curtains. It was about bending with it. Farmers and sailors used the light to work extended hours, knowing the winters would balance the scale later. You're grumbling about jet lag after flying across one time zone, but the Vikings managed an annual jet lag cycle without complaint. They let their sleep mirror the light rather than resisting it. That adaptability is a hack modern bodies desperately crave but rarely practice. Here's the quirky part. Evidence suggests Vikings didn't measure time in the rigid hours you know. Instead, they used Eicht, a division of the day tied to sun position. Sleep wasn't dictated by a clock, it was by the sky itself. You drifted off when darkness arrived, stirred when light returned. Imagine a world without alarm clocks, without 6:30 meetings, without just 5 more minutes snooze buttons. Historians still argue whether the lack of fixed hours increased rest quality, but many anthropologists suggest it removed much of the stress associated with artificial scheduling. That stress, of course, is what keeps you awake at 11:59, bargaining with your future self about how tired you'll feel tomorrow. Seasonal sleep wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Darkness and light carried symbolic meaning. Winter nights were times for reflection, for honoring ancestors, for telling sagas by firelight. Summer nights, filled with sunlight, were times for trade, raiding, feasting. Sleep itself became ritualized through these shifts. Winter slumber as a kind of spiritual retreat, summer rest as short refueling breaks between bursts of activity. You can almost feel the contrast in your bones. Deep winter cocooning versus restless summer vitality. The body moved with nature's pendulum instead of resisting it. Another detail, body clocks were often aligned by shared work. Entire households rose together, slept together, and paused in unison. That communal rhythm reinforced the seasonal patterns. You weren't lying awake alone in the dark. You were awake during the mid-sleep watch, listening to your neighbor stoke the embers. The shared cycle normalized the odd rhythms. Compare that with your modern insomnia, where you scroll your phone at 3 a.m. feeling like the only conscious human on Earth. The Vikings made wakefulness a shared event, not a private shame. That in itself softened the anxiety of sleep irregularity. Let's touch on food again, but seasonally. In winter, calorie-rich meals, stews thick with fat, bread heavy with grains, slowed the body and encouraged longer rest. In summer, lighter fare like fresh fish or berries kept people energized for extended days. Food and sleep were tuned to the seasons like a duet. You, meanwhile, slam down pizza rolls at 11 p.m. in July, then wonder why you can't sleep under the blazing heat. Vikings intuitively adapted diet as part of the seasonal hack. Historians still argue whether this was conscious strategy or simple necessity, but either way, the result was the same. Their sleep patterns aligned with their eating cycles. And let's not skip the impact of festivals. Viking life revolved around seasonal gatherings, Yule in winter, midsummer celebrations in June. These festivals punctuated the calendar with ritualized disruptions of sleep. Nights of feasting, storytelling, and firelit vigils were communal reminders that not all rest had to be perfect. Sometimes you sacrificed a little slumber for connection. And because it was cyclical, predictable, it didn't harm their overall rhythms. Contrast that with your random, anxiety-fueled all-nighters that shred your circadian stability. Vikings built exceptions into their calendar, so the pattern absorbed the disruption rather than collapsed from it. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe that during polar winters, Viking households may have leaned heavily on animal companions for warmth and even psychological comfort. Cows, sheep, and horses shared space within the longhouse. The low rumble of animals breathing, the radiating warmth of their bodies, all of it reinforced the rhythm of communal winter rest. You picture yourself spooning your dog at night, half asleep while he kicks in his dream. Turns out, you're reenacting a thousand-year-old tradition. Another debate: did segmented winter sleep promote creativity? Some sleep researchers argue that waking in the night allows for a unique hypnagogic state, half dream, half thought, that sparks creativity. Historical records outside the Viking world support this. So, it's possible those long winter intermissions gave rise to sagas, poetry, and innovations. Imagine if your 3 a.m. wake-ups weren't curses but gifts, moments of insight borrowed from the darkness. Vikings may have leaned into that naturally, turning insomnia into inspiration. By now, you can see how Viking sleep wasn't just about hay mattresses or warm hides. It was about surrendering to seasonality. Instead of demanding consistency, they allowed variability. Instead of clinging to 8 hours or bust, they flowed with light and dark, feast and famine, labor and rest. That flexibility, ironically, created more stability. Your obsession with perfect sleep metrics might be the very thing sabotaging you, while the Vikings thrived with fluid cycles. Imagine yourself now in their shoes, or rather their boots. Winter settles in, snow muffling every sound, and you accept the long rest, waking in the middle to whisper to the fire. Or summer arrives, the sun refusing to dip below the fjord, and you nap in bursts, trusting that winter will repay your debt. That trust in cycles, trust in nature, is what allowed Vikings to sleep without panic. And that may be the greatest seasonal hack of them all. The longhouse grows quiet again, but the silence feels heavier now, almost like it's asking you to listen closer. Because tonight, you aren't just surrounded by family, neighbors, and the soft breath of animals. You're also surrounded by the invisible presence of gods, spirits, and the restless dead. For the Vikings, sleep wasn't only a biological necessity or a cultural rhythm. It was a spiritual crossing point, a nightly vulnerability when the unseen could press close. And that belief shaped how they approached rest. You might shrug off your insomnia as stress from unpaid bills, but a Viking would have wondered whether Odin himself had brushed past in the dark. Let's start with Odin, the All-Father, the wanderer with one eye and a thirst for wisdom. He was said to roam the worlds, gathering knowledge through sacrifice and vision. Some sagas describe him as entering dreams, offering warnings or cryptic guidance. Imagine waking from a vivid dream of a cloaked stranger, then immediately believing it was Odin, not your subconscious, speaking. That weight transforms sleep from passive rest into potential communion. Historians still argue whether these dream visit traditions were widely believed or only preserved in mythic tales, but the very possibility infused sleep with significance. Then there were the Landvitir, spirits tied to the earth, hills, and waters. They weren't malicious by default, but they demanded respect. Sleep in the wrong place, disturb the wrong mound, and you might invite their displeasure. Imagine trying to nap in a meadow, only to wake terrified because you dreamed of angry eyes. To a Viking, that wasn't a nightmare. It was the Landvitir telling you to move along. You, meanwhile, wake from a bad dream on your living room couch and just grumble about your posture. For them, location and spirit were intertwined. Where you slept mattered as much as how you slept. And then there were Draugr, the undead. These weren't your friendly, transparent ghosts. They were malevolent corpses that could rise, terrorize, and suffocate the living. To fall asleep without protective charms could mean leaving yourself open to their grip. Amulets, runes, whispered prayers before bed, these weren't just rituals of superstition but nightly shields against the dark. You clutch your weighted blanket for comfort. A Viking clutched Thor's hammer pendant. Which one sounds more badass? But the gods themselves weren't always protectors. Take Freyja, goddess of love, fertility, and magic. She was linked to Sather, a form of sorcery often practiced in altered states, sometimes through trance or sleep. Those who followed her might have viewed sleep as a gateway to magical experience, a liminal state where Sather could be performed. Imagine drifting off not with Netflix humming in the background, but with the thought, maybe tonight I'll slip into a trance and see beyond. You might call that lucid dreaming. They called it touching the divine. Here's the quirky tidbit. Certain burial sites suggest that sleeping close to ancestors, or even with relics of them nearby, was seen as protective. Archaeologists have uncovered graves within or just outside settlements, as if the presence of the dead anchored the living in safety. Sleeping near your grandmother's bones might sound creepy to you, but to them it was comforting, a nightly reminder that you were shielded by kin. Historians still argue whether this was practical, keeping ancestors close to watch over fields, or spiritual, keeping their guidance at hand. But either way, it tied death, spirit, and sleep together. Now think about the fear factor. If every night carried the chance of spirit visitations, how did anyone actually relax enough to sleep? The answer lies in protective rituals. Charms were carved into bedposts, runes etched into wood, talismans hung from necks. Words were whispered, not unlike prayers today. These rituals weren't optional, they were embedded into the culture of rest. That's the hack. Protection equals permission to surrender. When you believe you've done everything to secure yourself, your mind finally unclenches. You're not lying awake catastrophizing. You're convinced Thor himself is standing guard. Of course, not all supernatural sleep associations were frightening. Some were deeply comforting. The goddess Nat, personification of night, rode across the sky on her horse, bringing darkness like a blanket. Her son was Dagger the day. This imagery turned sleep into part of a divine cycle. Night arrives not as a threat, but as a gift, a pause before day. You picture it, the great horse pulling night across the horizon, and you, a small figure curling beneath it like a child. Compare that to your sterile notion of bedtime as a necessary evil before your alarm screeches you awake. The Vikings, at least in myth, treated night as sacred. And let's not ignore the role of fate. Norns, those mysterious weavers of destiny, were believed to shape lives at birth, but their threads stretched into dreams and sleep as well. If your life path was already woven, then nightly rest wasn't just recovery, it was alignment with destiny. Perhaps you even glimpsed your thread in a dream. Imagine lying in bed believing the universe's weavers had already carved tomorrow's events. Anxiety shrinks when you think control isn't yours to lose. Historians still argue whether everyday Vikings truly dwelt on Norns, or if this was a literary trope. But either way, the concept reinforced surrender to rest. The sagas often frame sleep as vulnerable. Heroes are attacked in their sleep, caught unaware. To combat this, communities leaned into shared security, sleeping in groups, posting night watches, even lying with weapons nearby. The vulnerability was acknowledged but never ignored. You, on the other hand, lock your door once and assume Alexa listening in the background will save you. Vikings created redundancy, layers of spiritual and practical defense. Their sleep was fragile, yes, but safeguarded. Quirky fact. Some believed that part of the soul, the hugger, could wander during sleep. Dreams weren't just visions, they were the soul's journeys outside the body. That meant your nightly slumber doubled as travel. No wonder people took it seriously. Your very essence was roaming. Imagine treating your dreams not as silly but as literal adventures. You'd probably guard your body carefully while your hugger explored. And guarding the body, through amulets, charms, rituals, became essential. Historians still argue whether this belief was universal or limited to elite storytellers, but it undeniably colored the way people viewed rest. And because everything tied back to survival, the supernatural world of sleep wasn't abstract philosophy. It was a framework for coping. Nightmares. They weren't just bad brain chemistry, they were warnings, attacks, or omens. Pleasant dreams, signs of blessings. Insomnia, evidence of spiritual imbalance or neglect of ritual. By externalizing these issues, Vikings reduced self-blame. You weren't failing to sleep. Forces were at work and rituals gave you tools to respond. Think about your own insomnia. You blame yourself, you spiral, you stress. What if instead you chalked it up to Loki's mischief and did a ritual to shoo him away? It might sound silly, but it's psychologically freeing. Now imagine yourself lying back in the longhouse. Thor's hammer pendant warm against your chest, the fire low, the wind rattling turf walls. Outside, darkness swells like an ocean, and in it, gods and spirits stir. You're not just closing your eyes, you're stepping into a corridor lined with ancestors, guarded by deities, threatened by Draugr. And somehow, knowing all that doesn't terrify you, it comforts you, because you aren't alone in sleep. You're held in a vast network of myth and magic, woven tighter than any weighted blanket. Picture the Viking longhouse once more. The fire in the center is burning low, crackling quietly as families shuffle into their sleeping spots. Children curl up close to their mothers, old warriors set aside their weapons within reach, and the livestock on the far end breathe in steady rhythm. But this section is not about the gods or Draugr waiting in the dark. It's about something more down-to-earth yet just as fascinating, the daily rhythms of time itself. Because for the Vikings, sleep was not only tied to survival and spirituality, it was tied to the natural flow of light, dark, and labor. And when we study how they structured their nights, we uncover one of the strangest hacks of all. They didn't sleep like we do. Today, most of us imagine sleep as one long, continuous stretch. You crawl into bed around midnight and wake up around 7. That's normal to you. But historians and sleep scientists point to evidence that this wasn't normal at all in pre-modern societies, including among the Norse. Instead, people often followed what's called segmented sleep, two distinct sleep phases, broken by a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night. Imagine this: your first sleep begins soon after dusk. You rest for 4 hours or so, then wake naturally around midnight. Not groggy, not annoyed, simply awake. For 1 to 2 hours, you talk quietly, stoke the fire, check animals, even engage in prayer or intimacy. Then, after this watch, you return to bed for your second sleep, waking with dawn. For Vikings, this pattern made perfect sense. In the dark north, with long winter nights stretching 16 hours or more, one continuous block of sleep wasn't practical. Segmented sleep provided flexibility. Time for vigilance, time for ritual, time for chores that couldn't wait for daylight. The sagas themselves hint at midnight activities, secret conversations, supernatural encounters, even crimes. You can almost hear the whispered voices in the longhouse during the dark interval, parents cautioning children not to stir too loudly lest spirits notice. Historians still argue whether segmented sleep was universally practiced in Viking Age Scandinavia, but the environmental and cultural evidence supports it strongly. Farmers, fishermen, and traders had to adapt to seasonal extremes. In summer, when daylight lingered late into the night, rest schedules shifted. In winter, the opposite held true. Darkness invited extended rest, but vigilance was always necessary. To you, sleep is squeezed between alarm clocks and commutes. To them, it expanded and contracted with the world itself. And here's the kicker: that middle-of-the-night wakefulness wasn't viewed as insomnia. Quite the opposite. It was a valued part of life. During that quiet liminal hour, when the fire glowed low and most of the world was silent, people felt closer to one another and closer to unseen forces. Intimacy between partners often happened during this time. Some scholars suggest that fertility rates may have been boosted by this natural schedule. Others point out that prayers and meditations were most potent at midnight, when the veil between worlds thinned. Compare that to you, lying awake at 3 a.m. panicking about work emails. They used the wakeful gap as a gift, not a curse. Let's zoom in on a scene. A Viking farmer wakes after first sleep. He sits up, rubs his eyes, and notices the embers dying low. He rises quietly, sprinkles fresh wood chips on the fire, and watches the sparks leap. His wife stirs, and they whisper together, planning the next day's work. Later, he might check on the animals, making sure no fox or wolf has approached the goats outside. He might even step outside, shivering in the cold, and look up at the stars. For him, the night is alive, the world breathing. He returns, lies down, and slips back into second sleep, calmer for having done his watch. For us, that pattern feels exotic. For them, it was just life. Now think about the psychological side. Today, many people suffer from insomnia because we've been conditioned to believe sleep must be unbroken. The minute you wake up, you panic. Why am I awake? Something's wrong. That panic itself prevents sleep from returning. But in Viking times, waking at night was expected. It carried no stigma. So instead of spiraling, they used it productively. This cultural framework transformed what we label as a problem into something normal, even beneficial. That right there is a hack modern people could learn from. Redefine what's normal, and the stress dissolves. Another fascinating angle comes from the Norse relationship with timekeeping. They didn't measure hours with mechanical precision. Instead, they divided the day and night into eiktir, or shifts, based loosely on the sun's position. These weren't exact 60-minute slices, they stretched and shrank with the seasons. Imagine living in a world where time itself is elastic. You don't wake at 7:00 a.m. sharp. You wake with dawn whenever dawn happens. This flexible system paired naturally with segmented sleep. If your middle-of-the-night watch stretched longer one evening, there was no lateness to fear. The sun, not the clock, set the schedule. You weren't trapped in a rigid machine of hours. You flowed with light and dark. Quirky fact, in some sagas, warriors are described as being roused from sleep at midnight or cockcrow. But these terms weren't precise. Midnight wasn't a fixed hour. It was simply the middle of darkness, which could vary greatly depending on the season. Cockcrow might happen earlier in summer, later in winter. So even language around sleep carried fluidity. For them, time was a living, breathing companion, not a mechanical overlord. Of course, segmented sleep also carried risks. That wakeful period created moments of vulnerability. Attacks often happened at night, when half-asleep households could be caught unprepared. Sagas record raids timed to strike between first and second sleep. Imagine raiders bursting in, firelight flickering, while the household stumbles awake. This danger reinforced the need for vigilance. One reason someone might stay awake intentionally during the watch. Sleep was never fully safe. It was always a negotiation between rest and readiness. Now consider children in this system. Youngsters probably followed the same rhythm, though with some leniency. A child waking in the night could be soothed with stories, taught prayers, or even given tasks. The midnight gap became a teaching moment, lessons whispered by parents in the quiet dark, shaping memory more strongly than daytime chatter. Imagine your child creeping from bed at 2 a.m. today. You'd scold them. A Viking might have used that moment to pass on family lore or practical wisdom. And what about the elderly? For older Vikings whose sleep might naturally fragment further, segmented sleep offered dignity. They weren't seen as broken insomniacs. Instead, they became natural guardians of the night, sitting watch while others slept. Their wakefulness added security to the household. What modern medicine frames as decline, they framed as contribution. Another subtle hack, reframing weakness as usefulness. It's worth noting that segmented sleep wasn't uniquely Viking. It appears across medieval Europe, referenced in English, French, and Italian sources. But in the harsh climates of Scandinavia, it had particular resonance. The extremes of light and dark demanded flexibility, and Norse resilience thrived on adaptation. Segmented sleep was both practical and cultural, fitting seamlessly into a worldview where night was alive with gods, spirits, and dangers. So what does this teach us now? It suggests that your struggle with sleep isn't always biological, it's cultural. You've been trained to expect a solid 8 hours, so you feel broken when you wake. But the Viking farmer by the fire would laugh at your panic. To him, waking was part of the design, not a flaw. He'd tell you to use the time, tend your inner fire, whisper with your partner, look at the stars. Then return to bed when your body calls. That mindset alone could change how you rest. Here's one last image. The longhouse in the dead of winter, snow piled high outside, silence so deep it hums. The fire's glow lights faces briefly as people stir in the watch. A mother nurses her baby. A father whispers a prayer to Thor. A grandfather hums a lullaby to himself. Then slowly, one by one, they settle again into second sleep. Night stretches heavy but safe until the pale light of dawn seeps in. That rhythm, first sleep, watch, second sleep, kept them alive, connected, and calm. The longhouse is quieter now, though not entirely still. A faint scratching sound drifts from the corner where someone drags a small bone comb through their hair. It's not vanity, it's defense. Because while the Vikings may have discovered many lifestyle hacks that gifted them deeper rest, their nights were not the clean, lavender-scented kind of sleep you dream about today. No, their slumber was wrapped in smoke, sweat, and sometimes crawling with tiny, unwelcome guests. Tonight, you get to face the less glamorous side of Viking sleep, the hygiene debates. Here's the odd truth. Compared to much of medieval Europe, Vikings were considered surprisingly clean. English chroniclers sneered that Norsemen bathed more often than locals, sometimes once a week. That might sound pitiful to you, accustomed to daily showers, but in the Middle Ages it was practically obsessive. Archaeologists have found countless bone and antler combs in Viking graves, suggesting grooming was a daily ritual. So yes, the Viking you picture with braided beard and sea-salted hair may have actually looked somewhat intentional. But here's the twist. Cleanliness didn't mean comfort. Those longhouses you've been sleeping in through this journey, they were smoky as a bonfire pit. Fire burned constantly in the hearth, filling the hall with warmth but also coating lungs with soot. There were no chimneys, only a smoke hole near the roof. That meant smoke pooled thick in the rafters, and at night it drifted down into your nose and mouth. Imagine trying to fall asleep with your eyes watering, lungs aching, every breath tasting of charcoal. Historians still argue whether longhouse smoke provided benefits, like deterring pests or preserving wood, or whether it simply wrecked lungs. But one thing's sure, breathing it every night shaped their sleep. Now let's talk about bedding. Viking beds weren't the plush, memory foam masterpieces you see in late-night commercials. They were wooden frames stuffed with straw or feathers, depending on wealth. Straw sounds natural and earthy, right? But give it 2 weeks and it becomes a playground for lice, fleas, and mites. Families often added layers of wool or animal skins for insulation, which trapped warmth but also trapped other things. Quirky fact: some beds were lined with aromatic herbs like juniper or sweet gale, partly for fragrance, partly because people thought the scents chased away bugs. Maybe they worked, maybe they didn't. Historians still argue whether herbal layers were practical repellents or just hopeful superstition. And here comes your fringe tidbit: lice combs. Vikings didn't just suffer parasites, they crafted tools to battle them. Archaeologists have uncovered delicate two-sided combs with teeth fine enough to snag lice in their eggs. Imagine sitting in bed, fire crackling, while your partner patiently combs through your hair in the midnight watch. It's intimate in a strange, itchy way. Some even believe knit combing could have doubled as a soothing nightly ritual, like your skincare routine today, just with more bugs. But was it restful? That depends. On the one hand, consistent grooming and the acceptance of lice as a normal part of life may have reduced the stress they caused. Unlike you, spiraling over a single mosquito in the room, they treated pests as unavoidable companions. On the other hand, chronic itching probably disrupted sleep quality. Some sagas even mention men waking to scratch themselves raw during winter nights. So yes, while Vikings may have slept better in some ways, their rest wasn't free from interruptions. Let's return to that smoky longhouse. Imagine lying on a straw bed, heavy wool pulled to your chin, warm from the day's work. You're drifting toward sleep when a faint scuttling moves across your scalp. You sigh, resigned, and scratch. Then you hear coughing from the far end of the hall, your uncle hacking as smoke irritates his chest. A child whimpers, soot settling in his eyes. Someone gets up to adjust the smoke hole, muttering about the gods' displeasure. This is the Viking version of a white noise machine, constant background coughing and scratching. Romantic, isn't it? But before you laugh too hard, remember this: our modern comforts come at their own costs. Sure, you sleep without lice, but you inhale microplastics from synthetic mattresses. You breathe air-conditioned chill or central heating dryness that leaves your throat parched. Your clean bedroom hums with electricity and light pollution. The Viking longhouse was smoky, yes, but its air carried the smell of wood, wool, and earth, not car exhaust. Their beds teemed with pests, but they were also biodegradable, replaced with each harvest. It's a strange trade-off, isn't it? Now let's bring in ritual. Hygiene wasn't only physical, it was spiritual. Some Viking charms invoke protection from Mara, malevolent beings believed to sit on sleepers' chests and cause nightmares. People tied small amulets to their beds or carved runes into bedposts. Washing before sleep, when possible, wasn't just refreshing, it was purifying, guarding the soul as much as the skin. Imagine dipping your hands into icy water, gasping at the cold, then whispering a prayer to Thor or Freyja before lying down. That combination of sensation and belief formed a mental cleanser, washing away anxieties before rest. There's also the debate about dental hygiene. Skeletal remains show Vikings had strong teeth, likely thanks to low-sugar diets, but tartar buildup was common. Some evidence suggests they used toothpicks or chewed aromatic twigs before bed. Was that ritual soothing like brushing today? Possibly. Imagine chewing a pine twig as the fire dims, sap sharp on your tongue, while family murmurs nearby. It's not minty toothpaste, but it grounds you in nature. Let's zoom out again. For a moment, picture two extremes. On one hand, the clean but restless modern sleeper, you tossing under artificial lights, hydrated skin glowing with expensive creams, but brain buzzing with blue screen static. On the other, the smoky, itchy Viking, wrapped in wool, skin rough, hair crawling, but mind empty, body spent, surrounded by kin. Which one sleeps better? Historians still argue whether their quality of sleep outweighed the discomforts. But one could argue their deeper connection to natural rhythms balanced what they lacked in hygiene. Now here's a quirky little paradox. The smoke that irritated lungs might also have had benefits. Researchers suggest longhouse smoke helped dry stored meat and deter insects. It may even have suppressed some airborne pathogens, inadvertently reducing illness. In other words, the very thing that made them cough might have extended their survival. That's the Viking life for you. Every comfort a compromise, every nuisance carrying hidden value. As you settle into their world, you realize the forgotten hack here isn't just about cleanliness. It's about resilience. Vikings accepted imperfection in their environment. They scratched, they coughed, they combed. But they didn't expect sterile conditions to guarantee sleep. Instead, they treated hygiene as a practice woven into daily rhythm, not an obsession or a crisis. They didn't panic when lice appeared, they reached for a comb. They didn't stress when smoke filled the rafters, they adjusted the fire. Compare that to you, panicking over a single sleepless night as though your life will collapse. Their hack was not cleanliness itself, but their calm in its absence. So picture the longhouse once more. A smoky chamber, beds stuffed with straw and herbs, family combing each other's hair by firelight, charms glinting faintly on posts. The air is far from fresh, the bedding far from clean, but the people within rest anyway, bodies heavy with labor, minds light with acceptance. That is the secret. Not spotless perfection, but surrender to the world as it is. And maybe that's the lesson you can carry into your own nights. Not to throw away your toothpaste or air purifier, but to let go of the chase for perfect conditions. Sleep doesn't bloom from sterile sheets alone. It comes when you accept the scratches, the coughs, the imperfections. Vikings knew this, and in their smoky halls among lice and soot, they found a rest you might envy. The fire in the longhouse has burned down to embers and the night is nearly gone. You lie there, heavy with everything you've witnessed, furs piled high, smoke curling through the rafters, whispers carried in the midnight watch. You've seen the rituals, the herbs, the combs, the amulets, the laughter over mead, the exhaustion from hard labor, and the strange serenity of segmented sleep. And now, as the pale edge of dawn spreads across the fjords, you finally step back from the Viking household, leaving their smoky walls behind. This last stretch is for reflection, the lost lessons, the echoes in your modern world, and the forgotten hack of sleep that waits quietly for you to reclaim it. Let's start with the obvious. Vikings didn't sleep in conditions you call ideal. Their beds were itchy, their air smoky, their rooms noisy with snoring kin and restless livestock. Yet they managed to slip into deep, restorative rest. How? The simplest answer is that their lives aligned with nature. You fight against it daily, blocking light with blinds, fighting time zones with coffee, numbing yourself with endless screens. They surrendered to rhythms, to dawn, dusk, seasons, and the pull of the body itself. This surrender was not weakness, it was wisdom. Think about segmented sleep again. Today, most people view midnight wakefulness as a disorder. The Vikings saw it as part of the pattern. That shift in perception alone changed the emotional texture of rest. Instead of anxiety, there was acceptance. Instead of tossing in frustration, there was whispering with family, praying, or simply staring at the fire. Imagine if you reframed your own wakefulness, not as insomnia, but as an invitation. What would you do with that hour? Journal, meditate, whisper to someone you love. Suddenly, the problem becomes a gift. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly slept better than us. After all, modern medicine gives us clean mattresses, climate control, and pest-free rooms. But your sleeplessness often comes not from discomfort, but from overstimulation. Blue light tricks your brain into thinking it's noon. Stress hormones linger long after you shut the laptop. You carry the world's noise into bed, alone in a silent room that feels anything but quiet. The Viking, by contrast, went to bed exhausted from rowing, farming, or smithing. His body demanded rest. His mind trusted the cycle of work and dark. In the contest between you and him, who truly finds peace? There's also the question of community. You crave privacy, shutting your door, silencing the house, curling alone in bed. But solitude doesn't always equal security. The Vikings shared warmth, space, and even dreams. Imagine lying shoulder to shoulder with family, heartbeats overlapping, breath sinking in the cold. There's a primal safety in that closeness, a reminder you're not alone. When nightmares came, someone was there. When raiders struck, someone stirred. That communal sense, lost in your modern bedrooms, may be the most potent sleep aid of all. Then there's ritual. You light lavender candles or play whale sounds on YouTube. They whispered prayers to gods, carved runes into wood, tied amulets to their bed frames. These gestures worked not because they had scientific proof, but because they created calm. Your mind needs permission to rest. Ritual gives it that permission. Whether you sip chamomile tea or recite lines to Odin, the act signals to your brain, the day is done, it's safe to let go. But let's not romanticize blindly. Their sleep carried dangers you'd balk at. Lice itched, smoke burned, raids struck at midnight, children whimpered in soot-filled halls. They accepted imperfection because they had no choice. Yet within that acceptance lies the hidden hack. Rest is not about perfection, it's about surrender. You can scrub your bedroom until it gleams, but if your mind resists, sleep will still flee. The Viking knew better. He scratched, he coughed, he prayed, and still he drifted. That resilience, more than furs or fire, is the true lost secret. And let's not forget dreams. To you, they're subconscious leftovers. To them, they were messages, omens of fate, whispers from gods, echoes of ancestors. Dreams mattered. They were shared, interpreted, feared, or celebrated. Imagine the richness of viewing your own night visions as guides, not random nonsense. Instead of brushing off the dream of a wolf as weird, you'd sit by the fire, wondering which journey or warning it carried. Your night hours would hold weight, deepening the sense that rest was more than pause, it was connection. Here's another quirk to consider: seasonality. In the north, endless summer days shrank rest, while long winter nights stretched it. Instead of fighting with blackout curtains or vitamin D lamps, Vikings adapted. They slept more in winter, less in summer. They let their bodies expand and contract with the world. You, trapped in the same 9 to 5 schedule year-round, force yourself into a flatline. Maybe the forgotten hack isn't just segmented sleep, but seasonal sleep. Longer nights when the world is dark, shorter when it's bright. Imagine the relief of leaning into the cycle instead of resisting it. And so, as dawn brightens, the longhouse fades behind you, but the echoes remain. You carry their lessons back into your modern bed. No, you don't need to stuff straw mattresses or inhale smoke to learn from them. What you need is their perspective, acceptance of imperfection, embrace of rhythm, rituals for release, and the understanding that sleep is not a mechanical task but a living cycle. Now let's do one final walkthrough of those echoes, as if you're packing them carefully in your mind like souvenirs. You'll take their furs, not literally, but as a reminder to find warmth and comfort in layering, not just thermostat control. You'll take their firelight, reminding yourself to dim the glow, to let darkness cue your body. You'll take their segmented rhythm, reframing wakefulness as opportunity. You'll take their mead ritual, not as nightly drinking, but as proof that winding down with community matters. You'll take their herbal remedies, knowing sometimes placebo is all the brain needs. You'll even take their lice combs, translated as persistence, patience, and acceptance that discomfort is part of the package. Historians still argue whether Vikings really achieved perfect sleep. But perhaps the argument misses the point. The secret isn't perfection, it's harmony. Harmony with the body, with others, with the seasons, and with the imperfect conditions of life. That's what they mastered, what you've lost, and what you can reclaim if you dare. So here's your choice. You can scroll until dawn, chasing dopamine through glowing screens. Or you can dim the lights, step into rhythm, let wakefulness stop frightening you, and breathe with the old wisdom of the North. The Vikings are gone, their halls crumbled, their ships long sunk. But their hack remains, waiting for you every night when your eyes grow heavy. Now let's soften the pace. The story winds down. You picture once more the Viking family sleeping soundly in their smoky hall. The fire glows low, the night hums quiet, and the world outside is hushed by snow. You step away gently, leaving them to rest, carrying their lessons into your own night. The journey is over and the hall has gone still. As you lie here now, listening with your own body to the echoes of Viking sleep, you realize how much has been forgotten and how much can be remembered. Their nights were imperfect but real, filled with warmth, discomfort, ritual, and surrender. They didn't control the night, they yielded to it. And that's the last whisper they leave for you, to yield, to trust, to let the body and the world meet in rest. You don't need furs or straw or smoky rafters to find it. You only need to dim your lights, breathe into stillness, and accept the rhythm your body already knows. Maybe you'll wake in the middle of the night. That's fine. It's not failure, it's ancient design. Take it as your watch, your quiet hour, your moment with the embers. Then return to sleep when it comes, softer, calmer. And if you listen closely, you might hear the faintest echo, the hush of waves against a Viking ship, the crackle of wood in a longhouse fire, the murmured prayer of someone you'll never meet but who knew the same need you do. The need for rest, the need for peace. So let the day slip away now. Your journey is complete. You've walked through fire and smoke, through sagas and silence, through dreams and dawn. And now, at last, you're home in your own bed, carrying their wisdom in your breath. Close your eyes. Let the night take you. Sweet dreams.